My son-in-law said there was no room for my granddaughter this Christmas. But that night, I saw him celebrating in an empty house. She stood outside the gate holding her little gift, snowflakes melting on her lashes, still believing someone would open the door. My sweet Lily, all of 7 years old, clutching that homemade ornament she'd spent weeks crafting for him. Her mittened hands shaking not from the cold, but from confusion. Why wouldn't Daddy Daniel let us in? Why were the lights on inside but nobody answering? I felt something break inside me that night. Something that had been cracking for months, but finally shattered completely. Cruelty had a new face, one that had smiled at me from across dinner tables, one that had called me Mom when my daughter was alive, one that had promised to take care of us both when cancer took her away. That night, as I wiped Lily's tears and carried her sleeping form back to my car, I made a vow. If he could lock her out on Christmas, the one night when every door should open for love, then I'd make sure he never opened another door again without remembering what he'd done to an innocent child. Before I tell you what I did that night, what I discovered, and how I made him pay, please like this video, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Because this story is about more than revenge. It's about what happens when a grandmother's love turns into a grandmother's wrath. You see, I wasn't always like this. 6 months ago, I was just Margaret, a 68-year-old widow living in my little cottage on Maple Street, surrounded by photographs of my late daughter Sarah and the gentle chaos that comes with raising a granddaughter. My world revolved around Lily's laughter echoing through rooms that had been too quiet since my husband passed 3 years ago. Every afternoon, she'd burst through my front door like sunshine breaking through storm clouds, her backpack sliding off her shoulder as she launched into stories about her day. We'd bake cookies that never quite turned out right, sing Christmas carols off-key while decorating my tree with ornaments collected over 5 decades of marriage, and read stories until her eyelids grew heavy. Sarah used to do the same thing when she was Lily's age. Same bright eyes, same stubborn cowlick that refused to stay down, same way of tilting her head when she was thinking really hard about something. Sometimes, watching Lily, it was like having my daughter back again, even for just a moment. Daniel seemed good enough back then. He'd married my Sarah when Lily was 4, stepped into the role of father with what I thought was genuine love. He'd bring Lily to visit me every weekend, stay for dinner, help with dishes, ask about my arthritis and whether I needed anything from the store. When Sarah got sick, he promised he'd take care of both of us. He looked me in the eye at her funeral and said, "You'll always be family, Mom." Always. But promises, I've learned, are just words until they're tested. The changes started small. Phone calls that went to voicemail. Weekend visits that got canceled because of work commitments or Lily's not feeling well. When I did see them, Daniel seemed distracted, checking his phone constantly, making excuses to leave early. Lily would cling to my leg when it was time to go, asking if she could stay just 1 more hour, please. I told myself it was grief. Men process loss differently, don't they? Maybe he needed space to heal. Maybe I was being too clingy, too demanding of his time. Sarah had always been the bridge between us, and without her, perhaps we were both struggling to find our footing. But a grandmother knows. Deep in her bones, she knows when something is wrong with her grandchild. Lily had stopped talking about school friends. She'd gotten quieter during our visits, more clingy, asking strange questions like, "Grandma, what does it mean when someone says you're baggage?" Or, "Do you think Daddy Daniel really loves me?" I should have paid more attention to those signs. I should have asked harder questions, demanded real answers instead of accepting his vague reassurances. But I was grieving too, drowning in my own loss, and it's easier to believe comfortable lies than face uncomfortable truths. The first real crack in the facade came in November. I'd called to discuss Thanksgiving plans, expecting our usual tradition. Daniel and Lily would come to my house, we'd cook together, maybe invite Mrs. Henderson from next door who'd been alone since her husband died. Simple. Warm. The way Sarah would have wanted it. Actually, Mom, we're going to keep it small this year. Just the 2 of us. Just the two of us. Not the three of us. Not our little family. Just him and Lily, like I was some distant relative to be managed rather than the grandmother who'd helped raise that child, who'd held her every night when Sarah was too sick from chemo to get out of bed. But we always. I know, but things change. Lily's getting older, and I think it's important for us to establish our own traditions now. Our own traditions. As if 5 years of shared holidays meant nothing. As if the love I'd poured into that child was something to be outgrown like last year's coat. I swallowed my hurt and agreed. What choice did I have? Push too hard and risk losing them entirely. So I spent Thanksgiving alone with a turkey far too big for one person, watching parade coverage on TV and pretending the ache in my chest was just arthritis. Lily called me that evening, her small voice tight with tears. "Grandma, I missed you today." "I missed you too, sweetheart. Daddy Daniel says we're too busy for visits right now, but I don't feel busy. I feel sad." That's when I knew. This wasn't about establishing independence or processing grief. This was about something else entirely. Something cruel and calculated that I couldn't quite name yet, but felt like ice forming in my veins. December brought more distance. More excuses. Phone calls that lasted 30 seconds instead of 30 minutes. When I suggested coming to their house instead of having them visit me, Daniel always had a reason why that wouldn't work. Too messy. Too busy. Lily had homework. They had plans. Plans that apparently never included me. I started driving by their house sometimes, just to see if they were really as busy as he claimed. The house I'd helped them buy when Sarah was still alive, using money from my husband's life insurance to cover the down payment because young families need help getting started. The house where I'd painted Lily's nursery pale yellow because we didn't know if Sarah was having a boy or a girl. The house where I'd spent countless evenings babysitting while Sarah and Daniel went on date nights, building love while I built trust with my granddaughter. The house that always seemed to have plenty of room for everyone except me. 3 weeks before Christmas, I decided to try one more time. I called on a Sunday evening when I knew Lily would be getting ready for bed and might want to say goodnight to her grandmother. "Daniel, it's Margaret." I was wondering about Christmas plans. Silence. Long enough that I thought the call had dropped. "Daniel?" "Yeah, Mom, I'm here." "Listen, about Christmas." My heart started racing. Something in his tone, flat and rehearsed, like he'd been practicing this conversation. "We've decided to keep it simple this year. Just the immediate family." I am immediate family. You know what I mean. But I didn't know what he meant. I didn't understand how a grandmother could stop being immediate family just because her daughter died. I didn't understand how love could have an expiration date or how promises made at grave sites could dissolve like sugar in rain. "Daniel, she's my granddaughter. My only grandchild. Christmas has always been. Things change, Margaret. I'm sorry, but that's just how it is. That's just how it is. Like it was weather. Like it was inevitable. Like cutting a 7-year-old off from her grandmother was as natural as seasons changing. Can I at least talk to Lily?" "She's in the bath." She wasn't in the bath. I could hear her in the background, asking who was on the phone. I could hear him shushing her, telling her to go to her room. I could hear my granddaughter's voice getting smaller as she was led away from the phone, away from me. "Daniel, please. Whatever I've done wrong, we can talk about it. But don't punish Lily for..." No one's being punished. We just need space. Space. From a grandmother who loved that child more than her own life. Space from the woman who'd held Lily's hand through every nightmare after her mother died, who'd taught her to braid friendship bracelets and make snow angels and believe in magic. I don't understand. You don't need to understand. You just need to respect my decision. His decision. Not their decision. Not a family decision. His decision to cut me out of Lily's life like I was some toxic influence instead of the woman who'd rocked her to sleep 1,000 nights and kissed 1,000 scraped knees and promised her 1,000 times that love never dies, even when people do. I hung up that night feeling like I'd been hollowed out with a spoon. Everything precious scraped away, leaving nothing but empty space and raw edges. I sat in my living room surrounded by Christmas decorations I'd put up for a granddaughter who wouldn't see them, looking at presents I'd wrapped for a child who wouldn't open them. But pain has a way of transforming. What starts as hurt can crystallize into something harder, sharper, more dangerous. I'd spent 2 months making excuses for him, telling myself he was grieving, that he needed patience and understanding. But sitting there alone in my decorated house, I finally saw the truth. This wasn't about grief. This was about convenience. I was inconvenient. A reminder of obligations he didn't want, connections he was ready to sever. Sarah was gone, so why keep her mother around? Why pretend to care about a woman who'd outlived her usefulness? The thought that came next was so clear, so fully formed, that it felt like someone else had put it in my head. But you helped buy that house. I sat up straighter. My husband's life insurance money. $25,000 toward their down payment. A gift, he'd called it then. A blessing. An investment in their future, in Lily's future. I went in my bedroom and pulled out the filing cabinet where I kept important papers. Birth certificates, insurance policies, my will, and there, in a manila folder labeled House Documents, were the papers from when they'd bought the house. I spread them across my kitchen table and put on my reading glasses. Mortgage paperwork, inspection reports, closing documents, and there it was. The deed. The deed with my name on it. Not as a co-signer. Not as a reference. As a co-owner. My hands started shaking as I read the fine print. When we'd helped with the down payment, the lawyer had suggested adding my name to protect my investment. Just paperwork, Daniel had said. Just formality. We'd planned to remove it later, after they'd built more equity, but then Sarah got sick and legal paperwork wasn't exactly our priority. Apparently, later had never come. I read the document 3 times to make sure I wasn't imagining things. But there it was, clear as Christmas morning, the house where Daniel lived, where my granddaughter lived, where I was no longer welcome, was legally half mine. The man who said there was no room for me at Christmas was living in my house. That night, I barely slept. I kept getting up to read the deed again, to make sure I wasn't dreaming. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I called old Mr. Benton, the lawyer who'd handled the house purchase. He was retired now, but he'd known my husband for 40 years and had helped us navigate Sarah's estate when she died. Margaret. How lovely to hear from you. How are you holding up? I'm fine, Harold. Listen, I need to ask you about something. The house that Sarah and Daniel bought, the one we helped with the down payment. My name is on the deed. Yes, I remember. We set it up that way to protect your investment. Smart move, as it turned out. What exactly does that mean? Legally? There was a pause. Well, it means you own 50% of the property. Has something happened? I told him everything. The gradual distance, the canceled visits, the Christmas exclusion. Harold listened without interrupting, making occasional humming sounds that could have been sympathy or something else entirely. Margaret, he said when I finished, I want you to know that legally you have several options. You could force a sale of the property and claim your share of the proceeds. You could file for partition. Or, you could require him to buy you out of your share at current market value. Given that house prices have gone up significantly since they bought it, that would be a considerable sum. And if he can't afford to buy me out, then you could exercise your rights as a co-owner, including the right to occupy the property. The right to occupy. The right to live in a house where there was supposedly no room for me. Harold, what would you need to do to explore these options? Just say the word, Margaret. I'll start making calls. I said the word. Over the next week, while Daniel ignored my calls and Lily was kept away from the phone, Harold worked quietly behind the scenes. Property appraisals, market analysis, legal precedents. The house was now worth almost twice what they'd paid for it. My 50% share was worth more than $70,000. Money that Daniel definitely didn't have. I found out about his finances the way grandmothers always find out things, through people who care more about truth than loyalty. Mrs. Patterson from the coffee shop downtown mentioned how Daniel had been coming in less frequently, claiming money was tight. The mailman mentioned seeing a lot of official-looking envelopes going to their address lately. Bill collectors, maybe, or lawyers. Lily's teacher called me directly, which was how I learned that Daniel hadn't paid for Lily's school pictures or the after-school program in 2 months. The school was trying to be understanding, but policies were policies. He was broke, living in a house he couldn't afford, maintaining a lifestyle that was bleeding him dry, and apparently deciding that cutting me out was easier than asking for help. The irony was perfect. The man who claimed there was no room for me was drowning in debt, living in a house I legally owned half of, raising a child with money problems while rejecting the grandmother who would have helped in a heartbeat if only he'd been honest. Christmas Eve came cold and bitter. I'd spent the morning wrapping presents for Lily, holding on to hope that maybe, somehow, he'd change his mind. Maybe Christmas magic would soften his heart. Maybe love would win. I called at noon. Daniel, it's Margaret. I know what you said, but it's Christmas Eve. Surely you can make an exception. Just for a few hours. I have presents for Lily. Margaret, I told you. We're keeping it small. She's 7 years old. She doesn't understand why her grandmother suddenly disappeared. She'll understand when she's older. What will she understand? That you threw away her family because it was convenient. Don't be dramatic. Dramatic. He called my heartbreak dramatic. My granddaughter's tears, my sleepless nights, my empty house filled with unopened presents, all of it just drama to him. Let me bring her gifts at least. I won't even come in. I'll leave them on the porch. Margaret. Please. The word came out smaller than I intended. Broken. The plea of a woman who'd lost her daughter and was losing her granddaughter and couldn't understand why the world kept taking pieces of her heart. Fine. But just the gifts. Don't ring the bell. I should have known better. I should have recognized the trap in his tone, the way he agreed too easily. But desperation makes you stupid, and I was desperate to give my granddaughter something, anything, to show her she was loved. I drove to their house as snow started falling, delicate flakes that caught the streetlight like tiny stars. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful, everyone inside preparing for Christmas morning. I could see warm light glowing from windows, families gathering, love making room for everyone who mattered. Their house looked beautiful. Daniel had put up new lights, hundreds of them outlining the roof and windows. The front yard had a snowman that Lily must have built, slightly lopsided with a carrot nose and button eyes. Christmas music drifted from somewhere inside, faint but cheerful. I parked on the street and gathered Lily's presents from my back seat. A dollhouse I'd been working on for months, carefully furnished with tiny chairs and tables. Books we'd planned to read together. A stuffed elephant that matched the one my daughter had loved as a child. Art supplies because Lily was always drawing pictures for my refrigerator. As I walked up their front path, carrying these tokens of love, I saw movement at the window. A small face pressed against the glass, breath fogging the pain. Lily had seen me. I waved and smiled, my heart lifting for the first time in weeks. She waved back, then disappeared from the window. I could hear her voice inside, excited, calling for Daniel. Daddy, Grandma's here. She brought presents. I set the gifts carefully on the porch, arranging them so she'd see them as soon as the door opened. Then I stepped back and waited, expecting Daniel to at least let her say hello, to let her see that her grandmother kept her promises. The door didn't open. I could hear voices inside, Lily's rising with confusion and hurt. But why can't I see her? She's right there. I can see her. Lily, go to your room. But Daddy. Now. I stood on that porch for 20 minutes, snow gathering on my shoulders, watching lights glow warmly in every window except the one where my granddaughter was being told she couldn't see the person who loved her most. I could hear Christmas music playing inside, could smell something delicious cooking, could see the warm yellow light spilling across the snow. Room for everything except love. Space for everything except family. Finally, I heard the lock turn. My heart jumped. Maybe he'd changed his mind. Maybe Christmas had worked its magic after all. But when the door opened, Daniel stepped out alone and quickly shut it behind him. Thanks for the gifts. Lily's taking a nap. She's not napping. I can hear her crying. She'll be fine. He looked past me toward the street, like he was checking to make sure I hadn't brought witnesses to this rejection. Like loving his stepdaughter was something shameful that needed to be hidden. Daniel, what happened to us? We used to be family. You're not family anymore, Margaret. You're Sarah's mother. Sarah's gone. The words hit like physical blows, each one carefully chosen to cut as deep as possible. I'm Lily's grandmother. You're a reminder of things I'd rather forget. She needs me. She needs stability. She needs to move forward. You keep dragging her backward. Dragging her backward. Like love was a burden. Like memories of her mother were poison instead of treasure. I love her. Love isn't enough. He turned to go back inside, dismissed me like I was a door-to-door salesman instead of the woman who'd helped raise his child. Daniel. He paused, hand on the doorknob. You'll regret this. He actually smiled then. Cold and condescending. Is that a threat, Margaret? It's a promise. I walked back to my car with as much dignity as I could manage, knowing Lily was probably watching from her bedroom window, knowing she was confused and heartbroken and wondering why love had suddenly become conditional. I drove around the neighborhood for an hour, too upset to go home, too angry to think straight. Past house after house filled with families celebrating together, past churches where people gathered to remember that Christmas is supposed to be about love making room in the world. When I finally parked in front of my own house, I sat in the driveway and cried. For my daughter who wasn't here to stop this cruelty. For my granddaughter who was learning that people you trust can abandon you without warning. For myself, because I was tired of being disposable, tired of watching people I loved disappear from my life. But somewhere between tears and exhaustion, between heartbreak and rage, a thought surfaced that stopped my crying immediately. He said Lily was napping. But Christmas Eve is when children are supposed to be too excited to sleep, when families stay up late watching movies and eating cookies and talking about Santa. What kind of Christmas Eve involves forcing a 7-year-old to take a nap instead of seeing her grandmother? I pulled out my phone and scrolled through social media, something I rarely did, but occasionally checked to see pictures of Lily that Daniel sometimes posted. His latest post was from 20 minutes ago. A photo of their dining room table, set for 4 people with expensive-looking plates and crystal glasses. Wine bottles opened, food that looked catered rather than homemade. The caption read, "Perfect intimate Christmas Eve dinner with my closest friends." Sometimes less is more. Hashtag blessed, hashtag family, hashtag new beginnings. For people. Not just him and Lily. For people sitting around a table where there was supposedly no room for one more. I scrolled through the comments. Friends congratulating him on his fresh start. Someone asking where the little one was. His response, she's with her other family tonight. Her other family. Like I'd been given custody instead of being locked out in the snow. More photos. Wine glasses raised in toasts. People laughing. An empty high chair pushed into the corner, like Lily's presence would have ruined the elegant atmosphere he was trying to create. The last photo was taken just minutes ago. Daniel and 3 people I didn't recognize, all holding champagne glasses, all smiling. The caption read, "To new chapters and leaving the past behind." Leaving the past behind. The past that included me. The past that included my daughter's memory. The past that included a 7-year-old girl who called him daddy and trusted him to protect her. I took screenshots of everything. Every photo, every comment, every callous word. Evidence of a man who was partying while his stepdaughter cried herself to sleep, who was toasting new beginnings while abandoning the people who'd loved him when he had nothing. Then I called Harold. "Margaret? It's Christmas Eve, dear. Is everything all right?" "No, Harold. Nothing is all right. How quickly can you file those papers we discussed? Well, the courts are closed until after Christmas, but I can have everything ready to file first thing Monday morning. Are you sure you want to do this? I looked at my phone at the photos of Daniel celebrating in a house I legally owned while my granddaughter was banished to her room. At comments from strangers praising him for his courage in cutting ties with toxic people. At evidence that this wasn't about grief or space or moving forward, it was about selfishness, pure and simple. I'm sure. What exactly do you want me to file? Everything. Eviction notice based on co-ownership. Demand for immediate buyout of my share at current market value. And Harold? Make sure it's delivered on December 26th. First thing in the morning. Margaret, that's going to create quite a scene. Good. He likes scenes. He likes posting about his life on social media. Let's give him something really worth posting about. Christmas Day passed in a blur of forced normalcy. I cooked a small turkey anyway, watched old movies, opened presents from neighbors who remembered that grief doesn't take holidays. I tried calling Lily twice, but the calls went straight to voicemail. That evening, I saw more photos online. Daniel and his friends at a restaurant, then at someone's house for an after-dinner party. Lily was mentioned once in the comments. Someone asked if she'd enjoyed Santa's visit, and Daniel responded that she was having a quiet day at home. A quiet day at home on Christmas. Alone while her stepfather partied with people who were apparently more important than the child he'd promised to love and protect. I went to bed that night feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Anticipation. Tomorrow, the man who said there was no room for love in his life was going to discover exactly how much room there was for consequences. December 26 dawned clear and cold. I was awake before sunrise, drinking coffee and watching the clock. Harold had promised the papers would be delivered by 9 a.m., along with a sheriff's deputy to ensure everything was official. At 8:45, I drove to their house and parked across the street. I wanted to see his face when reality knocked on his door. The deputy arrived exactly on time, followed by Harold in his old sedan. They walked up to the front door together, Harold carrying a briefcase and the deputy carrying an official-looking folder. I watched from my car as they rang the doorbell. Once, twice, 3 times before Daniel finally answered, looking disheveled and annoyed. Probably hungover from his celebration the night before. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could see Daniel's expression change as Harold introduced himself and the deputy explained why they were there. Confusion, then disbelief, then growing panic as he realized this wasn't some kind of mistake. He kept shaking his head, gesturing toward the house like he was explaining something important. But Harold just handed him the papers and pointed to specific sections, his voice calm and professional. Daniel's face went white when he understood what he was reading. Formal notice of co-ownership. Demand for immediate payment of $73,000 representing current market value of my 50% share. 30 days to comply or face eviction proceedings. The deputy handed him a second set of papers. Something about the legal requirement to allow co-owners access to their property. Daniel read those papers twice, his hands visibly shaking. Then he looked up and saw me sitting in my car across the street. Our eyes met through the windshield. I didn't wave. I didn't smile. I just looked at him with the same cold dismissal he'd shown me on Christmas Eve. He said something to Harold, pointing in my direction. Harold shrugged and said something back. The deputy nodded toward my car and said something that made Daniel's shoulders slump. They stayed on his porch for another 10 minutes, Harold explaining legalities while Daniel asked increasingly desperate questions. Finally, they shook hands professionally and walked back to their cars. Daniel stood on his porch holding those papers, watching Harold drive away, watching the deputy follow. Then he looked at me again. I rolled down my window. Good morning, Daniel. Beautiful day, isn't it? Margaret, what the hell is this? It's a legal notice. I assume you can read. You can't do this. Actually, I can. It's amazing what you can do when you own half of something. I had no idea your name was still on the deed. Of course you didn't. You never paid attention to details that didn't benefit you directly. He walked toward my car, still holding the papers. Look, we can work this out. We can talk about this. Like we talked about Christmas? That was different. No, Daniel. That was exactly the same. You made a decision about what was convenient for you, and you expected everyone else to just accept it. Well, now I'm making a decision about what's convenient for me. $73,000? Margaret, I don't have that kind of money. Then you have a problem. I have a child to think about. You should have thought about her on Christmas Eve. She's my daughter. She's my granddaughter. The granddaughter you told me I couldn't see because there wasn't room. I gestured toward the house, the big beautiful house with its perfect lawn and expensive Christmas decorations. Looks like there's plenty of room now. Lily appeared at the front window, still in her pajamas, watching the commotion. When she saw my car, her face lit up and she started waving frantically. I waved back, my heart aching at how happy she looked just to see me. Daniel noticed where I was looking and his expression hardened. Don't drag her into this. I'm not dragging her into anything. You dragged her into this when you decided to cut her off from her family. I'm trying to protect her. From what? From love? From stability? From the only grandmother she has left? From confusion? From mixed messages? From me. He didn't deny it. Why, Daniel? What did I ever do to you except love your family and help when you needed it? For a moment, his mask slipped. I saw something raw and angry and ashamed. You remind me of everything I've lost. Every time I look at you, I see Sarah. Every time Lily talks about you, she talks about Sarah. I can't move forward if I'm constantly being pulled backward. So you decided to erase us both. I decided to focus on the future instead of living in the past. Lily isn't the past, Daniel. She's your future. And I'm part of her story whether you like it or not. Not anymore. That's when I knew for certain that he'd never change. This wasn't about grief or healing or protecting Lily. This was about a man who'd grown tired of obligations that reminded him of promises he'd made when life was harder and love required more effort. You're right, I said finally. Not anymore. Because now you have 30 days to buy me out or find somewhere else to live. Margaret, please. Think about what you're doing. I've thought about nothing else for weeks. You want to know what I think? I think a man who throws away family for convenience doesn't deserve the house that family helped him buy. I'll fight this. With what lawyer? With what money? I'll figure something out. You have 30 days. I rolled up my window and drove away, leaving him standing on the porch of a house he was about to lose, holding papers that spelled out exactly how much his cruelty was going to cost him. But this was just the beginning. Over the next week, word spread through our small town with the speed that only really good gossip can achieve. The story grew in the telling, as stories do, but the essential facts remained the same. A widowed grandmother had been denied Christmas with her granddaughter, only to reveal that she legally owned half the house where the rejection had taken place. Mrs. Patterson at the coffee shop was the first to call me. Margaret, honey, I heard about what happened. That boy got some nerve, I tell you. Cutting you off from Lily after everything you've done for them. Then Mrs. Chen from the grocery store. My daughter goes to school with Lily. Poor little thing's been asking everyone if they know why her grandma can't come over anymore. Then my neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez. I saw the sheriff at their house yesterday. If you need anything, you just let me know. What that man did to you on Christmas was shameful. By New Year's Eve, Daniel's social media posts had taken on a distinctly different tone. Gone were the cheerful updates about new beginnings. Instead, he was posting vague messages about difficult times and unfair legal challenges and asking for prayers. The comments section told a more complete story. Friends who'd praised his fresh start were now asking pointed questions about why he was being evicted. Coworkers were sharing their own stories about Daniel's increasingly erratic behavior at work. Someone had shared screenshots of his Christmas Eve posts alongside news of the eviction, and the internet was not kind to a man who celebrated while excluding his stepdaughter's grandmother. His business started suffering almost immediately. Daniel worked in real estate, and reputation meant everything in that industry. Clients began backing out of deals, citing personal concerns about working with someone involved in such a public family dispute. His brokerage received enough complaints that they asked him to take a leave of absence until things settled down. But the most devastating blow came from an unexpected source, Lily's teacher. She called me directly on January 3rd. "Mrs. Patterson? This is Mrs. Williams from Lily's school. I hope you don't mind me calling, but I'm concerned about Lily." "What's wrong? Is she hurt?" "Not hurt exactly, but she's been very upset since Christmas break ended. She keeps asking when she can see you again, and when I mentioned it to her father, he became quite agitated." "Agitated how?" "He yelled at me in front of other parents, Mrs. Patterson. He said it was none of the school's business who Lily sees outside of school hours. But the thing is, Lily's performance has been declining since November. Her grades are dropping, she's not participating in class activities, and she seems anxious all the time." "Have you seen this before?" "Unfortunately, yes. Children of divorce often exhibit these behaviors when they're being used as weapons against family members. The psychological term is parental alienation, and it can cause serious long-term damage." Parental alienation. There was a name for what Daniel was doing to my granddaughter. A clinical term for the cruelty I'd witnessed. "Mrs. Williams, is there anything I can do officially? Legally?" "Well, that depends. Do you have any legal standing?" "Grandparents' rights vary by state, but if you've been a significant presence in her life." "I've been taking care of her since she was 2 years old. Her mother was my daughter." "Then you might have options." "I can't give legal advice, but I can document what I've observed in Lily's behavior. If you decide to pursue custody or visitation rights, the court would want to see evidence of the child's best interests." "Custody." The word hung in the air like a challenge. Did I have the strength for that kind of battle? Did I have the right? "Mrs. Williams, in your professional opinion, would it benefit Lily to have regular contact with me?" "Mrs. Patterson, that little girl lights up whenever she talks about you. She draws pictures of your house, writes stories about baking cookies with her grandma, asks if she can call you during recess. In my 20 years of teaching, I've rarely seen a child more bonded with a grandparent." "And Daniel?" A long pause. "Let's just say that Mr. Morrison seems more concerned with his own emotional well-being than his daughter's." That afternoon, I called Harold again. "I want to explore grandparents' rights." "Margaret, that's a complex area of law. Are you sure you want to take this step?" "Harold, my granddaughter is being damaged by a man who's using her as a weapon against me. If I don't fight for her, who will? It could get ugly. Family court battles often do. It's already ugly. At least this way, there's a chance she'll get her grandmother back." Within a week, Harold had filed a petition for grandparents' visitation rights, citing my significant role in Lily's upbringing and Daniel's arbitrary decision to cut off contact. The petition included statements from Mrs. Williams, documentation of my financial contributions to Lily's welfare, and photographs showing the close relationship Lily and I had maintained since her birth. Daniel's response was swift and vicious. His lawyer filed countermotions claiming I was a disruptive influence who undermined his parental authority and created confusion in Lily's life. He painted me as a bitter woman unable to accept that my daughter was dead and my role in Lily's life was over. But I had advantages he didn't expect. The teacher's documentation of Lily's declining performance. Bank records showing my ongoing financial support. Character witnesses who could testify to my role in Lily's life. And most importantly, I had his own social media posts showing him celebrating while excluding his daughter from family gatherings. The court date was set for February 15th. In the meantime, the eviction proceedings moved forward with mechanical precision. Daniel had neither the money to buy me out nor the legal grounds to stop the process. His attempts to refinance the house were rejected by every bank he approached. His credit had taken too many hits, his income was too unstable, and the pending family court case made him too much of a risk. On February 1st, Harold called with an update that made me smile for the first time in months. Margaret, Daniel's lawyer, contacted me this morning. They want to negotiate. What kind of negotiation? They're proposing a settlement. Daniel would agree to regular visitation rights for you, every other weekend and holidays, in exchange for you dropping the eviction proceedings. What about custody? He's willing to discuss shared custody if you'll sell him your half of the house at below market value. I thought about that offer for exactly 3 seconds. Harold, please convey my response to Daniel's lawyer. What would you like me to tell them? Tell them that a man who locks a child out on Christmas doesn't get to negotiate the terms of love. Margaret, tell them I'll see them in court. The battle that followed was everything Harold had warned me it would be: ugly, public, and painful. Daniel's lawyer painted me as a controlling woman who couldn't accept boundaries. My lawyer presented evidence of a pattern of emotional manipulation and parental alienation. Lily's teacher testified about the decline in the child's well-being. Social services conducted interviews with both households. Character witnesses lined up on both sides, though notably, Daniel struggled to find people willing to testify on his behalf. The local newspaper covered the case because grandparents' rights were a hot topic in our state. The headline read, "Grandmother Fights for Evicted Granddaughter," and the story painted Daniel in an increasingly unfavorable light. More damaging to his case were the social media posts that kept surfacing. Screenshots of him celebrating new chapters while Lily was kept from seeing me. Comments where he'd referred to me as baggage and Lily as being better off without certain family members. But the turning point came when the judge decided to interview Lily privately. I wasn't allowed in the room, but Harold told me later what had happened. The judge, a woman in her 60s with grandchildren of her own, had asked Lily simple questions about her family, her feelings, her wishes. Lily had cried when asked about me. She'd asked if she was in trouble for loving her grandmother. She'd wanted to know why love had to be a secret and why wanting to see me made Daddy Daniel angry. When asked what she wanted most in the world, she'd said, "I want my grandma to come to my birthday party." Her birthday was March 10th. Daniel had already made it clear that I wouldn't be invited. On February 28th, Judge Morrison, no relation to Daniel, thankfully, issued her ruling. Full grandparents' visitation rights, including alternating weekends, major holidays, and school breaks. Mandatory family counseling to address the damage caused by inappropriate parental alienation. And most importantly, an order that any interference with court-mandated visitation would result in contempt charges and possible custody modification. But she didn't stop there. It is the opinion of this court, Judge Morrison had written, that the respondent's actions demonstrate a pattern of using the minor child as a weapon against the petitioner, prioritizing his own emotional comfort over the child's psychological well-being. This behavior is unacceptable and will not be tolerated. Daniel was ordered to pay my legal fees. The eviction proceedings were allowed to continue. And most satisfying of all, he was required to publicly apologize for his interference with my relationship with Lily. That apology was posted on the same social media accounts where he'd celebrated his new beginning. It was brief, obviously written by his lawyer, and completely lacking in sincerity. But it was public acknowledgement that he'd been wrong. The comments section was brutal. Friends and family members expressing shock at his behavior. Business associates distancing themselves from the controversy. Former supporters now criticizing his treatment of a grieving grandmother and innocent child. On March 12th, exactly 30 days after the court ruling, Daniel moved out of the house he could no longer afford and I could no longer allow him to occupy. He found a small apartment across town, the kind of place that accepts tenants with damaged credit and uncertain income. Lily would spend weekdays there when she wasn't with me, sleeping in a tiny bedroom with thin walls and no yard for snowmen. I didn't take any joy in his reduced circumstances. I took satisfaction in justice, but no pleasure in his pain. This had never been about revenge for its own sake. It had been about consequences, about teaching a man that love is not disposable and family is not optional. The house felt different with them gone. Quieter, but not empty. I walked through rooms where my daughter had grown up, where my granddaughter had taken her first steps, where 3 generations of women had loved and laughed and built memories. I converted Daniel's former home office into a proper bedroom for Lily, painted in the soft yellow she'd chosen herself. I hung pictures of her mother on the walls, photos Daniel had packed away because they made him uncomfortable. I filled shelves with books and art supplies and all the things a 7-year-old needs to feel at home. When Lily arrived for her first official weekend visit under the court order, she ran through every room like she was rediscovering a treasure she'd thought was lost forever. "Grandma, can I really live here sometimes?" "You can live here anytime you want, sweetheart. Even on Christmas?" "Especially on Christmas." That night, as I tucked her into bed in her new room, she asked the question I'd been dreading. "Grandma, why didn't Daddy Daniel want me to see you?" I thought carefully about my answer. The court-ordered counselor had advised honesty appropriate to her age level without demonizing her stepfather. "Sometimes adults make mistakes when they're sad, honey. Daddy Daniel was very sad after Mommy died, and he thought keeping you away from things that reminded him of her would make the sadness go away. But I don't want to forget Mommy. And you never will. Love doesn't die just because people do. Your mommy's love is always with you, just like my love will always be with you. Even if I'm far away? Even if you're on the moon." She giggled at that, the sound filling corners of the house that had been too quiet for too long. 6 months later, Daniel made another mistake. He posted photos from his new girlfriend's birthday party. A lavish celebration at an expensive restaurant, complete with champagne and designer gifts. The caption read, "Finally found someone who appreciates the good life." The comments were predictable. Friends congratulating him on moving on, finding happiness, embracing his future. But mixed in were other voices, people who remembered the grandmother he'd evicted and the child he'd used as a pawn. Interesting how you can afford champagne, but couldn't afford to let your daughter see her grandmother. Some people have short memories about who helped them when they had nothing. Hope this one works out better than your last attempt at new beginnings. I didn't comment. I didn't need to. The court of public opinion had already rendered its verdict, and Daniel would carry the consequences of his choices for years to come. But the most profound consequence came from an unexpected source. Lily's new school had a Grandparents' Day in November, 8 months after the court ruling. Children were supposed to invite their grandparents to visit their classroom, share stories, and participate in activities. Lily had been looking forward to it for weeks, planning what she wanted to show me, practicing the poem she'd written about our relationship. The day before the event, Daniel called. "Margaret, I need to ask you something." His tone was different. Smaller. Less certain than I'd heard it in over a year. "What is it, Daniel?" "Lily's been talking about Grandparents' Day. About how excited she is to have you there." "Yes, she's been planning it for weeks. The thing is, my mother can't make it. She's in Florida visiting my sister. And my father passed away last spring." I hadn't known about his father. For all our legal battles, Daniel had kept his personal losses private. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you." A pause. "Margaret, Lily asked if you could be her grandparent for both sides tomorrow. She said she knows you love Sarah, so maybe you could love her daddy's family too." Out of the mouths of babes. A 7-year-old offering healing to adults too stubborn to find it themselves. "What are you asking me, Daniel?" "I'm asking if you'd be willing to represent both families tomorrow. To be the grandmother who shows up when grandparents can't." It was the closest thing to an apology I was likely to get from him. Not an admission of wrongdoing, but an acknowledgement that love was bigger than pride, that family could be more than biology or legal documents. Of course I'll be there for her. Thank you. Daniel? Yes. You're welcome to join us. If you want. Another pause, longer this time. I'd like that. Grandparents' Day turned out to be everything Lily had hoped for and more. She introduced me to her classmates with the kind of pride that makes grandmothers glow. She read her poem aloud, a sweet, simple verse about cookies and hugs and feeling safe. She showed me her artwork, her reading progress, her science project about butterflies. Daniel arrived halfway through the morning, looking nervous and uncertain. But Lily's face lit up when she saw him, and she immediately pulled him over to meet Mrs. Williams and see everything she'd been showing me. For 2 hours, we functioned as a family again. Imperfect, complicated, damaged by our mistakes, but united in our love for one small girl who deserved better than the chaos we'd created. As we walked to the parking lot afterward, Daniel fell into step beside me. Margaret, I owe you an apology. Yes, you do. I was wrong. About Christmas, about cutting you off, about using Lily as a weapon. I was hurt and angry and I made terrible decisions. Why now? Why apologize now? Because last week, Lily asked me why I hated you. And I realized I didn't have a good answer. I realized I didn't hate you at all. I was just lost. Daniel, I never wanted to hurt you. I just wanted to see my granddaughter. I know that now. And I know that Sarah would be ashamed of how I've acted. Sarah would want us to take care of each other. Is it too late for that? I looked at him then, really looked at him for the first time in over a year. He'd lost weight, gained gray hair, developed lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and hard lessons. But underneath the damage, I could still see the young man who'd promised my dying daughter that he'd protect her baby. It's not too late, Daniel. It's never too late to choose love over pride. 2 years have passed since that Christmas Eve when Daniel said there was no room for love in his life. Lily is 9 now, tall and confident and secure in the knowledge that family doesn't abandon you when things get complicated. She splits her time between her father's apartment and my house, which she now calls Grandma's house, with the kind of ownership that makes my heart sing. We've established new traditions, pancakes every Saturday morning, library visits every Tuesday after school, Christmas Eve cookie decorating that fills the kitchen with flour and laughter. Daniel remarried last spring, and his new wife Jennifer has proven to be exactly what Lily needed, a woman secure enough in herself to welcome a child's love for her grandmother. Wise enough to understand that families are built on inclusion rather than exclusion. The 3 of us now coordinate holidays, school events, and major decisions with the kind of cooperation that should have existed all along. It's not perfect. There are still moments of tension, still reminders of the damage that was done, but it works because we've all learned that love requires more courage than fear. Last Christmas, we celebrated together in my house. The same house where Daniel once said there was no room for me. The same dining room where he'd posted photos of celebrations that excluded his daughter's grandmother. As we sat around my table, Daniel, Jennifer, Lily, and me, sharing stories and passing dishes and making new memories, I thought about that bitter Christmas Eve 2 years ago. I thought about the woman I'd been then, heartbroken and powerless, watching love being rejected from behind a closed door. I thought about the woman I am now, surrounded by the family I'd fought to reclaim, in the house I'd refused to give up. Grandma, Lily said as we finished dinner, "Can you tell the story about the Christmas when Daddy Daniel said there was no room but you found room anyway?" I looked across the table at Daniel, who had the grace to look embarrassed, but not defensive. "What would you like to know about that story, sweetheart? How did you know to fight back? How did you know you could win?" "I didn't know I could win, Lily. I only knew I couldn't lose. Because losing would have meant losing you, and that was impossible. But what if Daddy Daniel had been right? What if there really wasn't room? There's always room for love, sweetheart. Sometimes people forget that, and sometimes they need to be reminded. But love always finds a way to make space. Like you made space in the house? Like I made space in my heart. The house was just walls and rooms. But love is what makes a place feel like home. Daniel cleared his throat. Lily, I want you to know that Grandma fought for you because she loves you. And I want you to know that I was wrong to try to keep that love away from you. But you love me too, right, Daddy? More than anything in the world. And Jennifer loves me? Of course I do, Jennifer said, reaching over to squeeze Lily's hand. And Grandma loves all of us? I looked around the table at this imperfect, complicated, beautiful family we'd somehow managed to rebuild from the ashes of our mistakes. Yes, sweetheart. Grandma loves all of us. Then there's room for everyone. From the mouths of babes, indeed. Later that night, after Daniel and Jennifer had taken Lily home to their apartment, I sat in my living room looking at the tree we'd decorated together. Under its branches were presents wrapped with care, tokens of love that would be opened and appreciated, not rejected at closed doors. I thought about the woman who'd sat in this same room 2 years ago, surrounded by gifts for a granddaughter she wasn't allowed to see, drowning in grief and powerlessness. I thought about the strength I'd found in that darkness, the courage I'd summoned from desperation, the love that had refused to be denied. Most of all, I thought about the lesson I'd learned from that bitter Christmas, that sometimes, when people tell you there's no room for love in their lives, you have to show them exactly how much space love can claim when it refuses to be locked out. The man who said there was no room for my granddaughter this Christmas learned that love doesn't ask permission to take up space. It simply finds a way in. And once it's inside, it rearranges everything to make room for what matters most.